happened to me, see, they didn't want a black guy to be the one that created rock and roll because the white kids liked it. And they didn't want the white girl screaming over no black boy. And by me being a black guy and a good-looking black guy, and you know I'm not conceited.
No.
I've never been that way.
No.
You know I don't believe in stuff like that.
I hope don't nobody mistake this.
I hope they don't. I'm not. I'm not conceited. I'm convinced.
You're way overdue.
Yes.
Way overdue.
Yes.
You know what he got this morning? He got his star on the Walk of Fame. Yeah. Now, my first question to you is, what took him so long?
That's what I've been wondering. I started to go over there and look at them. And you know, when I look at them, they don't know what to say. I started going and asking, what is it? What's wrong?
Yes.
I started to tell them. But you know, I think it was a bunch of old people that didn't know what was going on, never had it, can't get it, don't know where to find it. And what they did, they just didn't put my vote in. But I got it now, and they can't take it back. Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Let it all hang out with the beautiful little Richard from down in Macon, Georgia. I am the king of rock and roll. Ow, ow, ow. My. I just had to do that. Now I feel so much better. I got it out.
Few musicians from the early days of rock and roll were as forceful and thrilling as this vocalist, and no one matched his charisma and flamboyance. Blessed with a remarkably powerful voice, his piercing characteristic "ooh" remains one of the most emotive screams in American music. This singer's rollick and piano style fused gospel, rhythm and blues, and boogie woogie into a purely electric sound, and he surprised audiences with his flashy clothes, outrageous persona, and willingness to present a sexually ambiguous image at a time when such things were almost unknown in popular culture. Although this artist had a very brief career as a huge hitmaker, he established a reputation as an uncompromising stage performer capable of blowing practically any act off the stage, and his effect will be felt decades after he ceased charting songs regularly. The centerpiece of today's video is all about Little Richard. Before we start, let's be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and push the notification bell to be sure you won't miss on any more uploads. Now without further ado, let's cue that intro. Born Richard Wayne Penniman in Macon, Georgia on December 5th, 1932, he's the third of 12 children. His mother was very devout and usually visited a Baptist church where his father served as a deacon. Richard's father was also a brick builder and bootlegger who managed a honky-tonk called the Tip Inn. Richard was born with one leg slightly shorter than the other, giving him a gait that some considered effeminate, and he grew up in a neighborhood with a strong underground culture of homosexual life and cross-dressing, which had a profound influence on him. Richard, like his parents, was a devout churchgoer, and his early musical interests were in gospel, with influences like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Mahalia Jackson, and Brother Joe May. By junior high, Richard had learned to play the piano and saxophone, and he was well known in his church for his powerful, high-register singing voice. In high school, Richard worked part-time for a local concert organizer, serving refreshments at the Macon City Auditorium, where he witnessed gospel and R&B legends such as Cab Calloway and Lucky Millinder. Richard was 14 years old when Sister Rosetta Tharpe performed there. She overheard Richard singing early in the day and requested him to sing a few songs on stage before she began her show. Richard was encouraged by Tharpe to pursue a career in music, and in 1949 he joined a traveling show of an eccentric performer named Dr. Nubilo, where he took up Nobilo's zest for extravagant performances. Later that year, Richard embarked on a tour with Dr. Hudson's Medicine Show, where he performed the Louis Jordan song Caldonia, his first time singing R&B, which his parents considered wicked, and appeared in drag as Princess Lavon. Richard secured a singing position with Buster Brown and his orchestra in 1950, and the bandleader gave him the moniker Little Richard because of his lanky stature, which stuck. Richard visited the Black Vaudeville circuit, where he met Billy Wright, an R&B singer who helped him perfect his appearance with pancake makeup, a pencil-thin mustache, and elegant stage clothes. Wright also connected Richard to Zena Sears, a disc jockey with music industry ties, which led to Richard securing a record deal with RCA Victor. Richard produced 4 singles with RCA between 1951 and 1952, but they lacked his signature fire and failed to reach an audience. Thus, when he joined with Peacock Records, he released 2 singles that were immediately forgotten, despite Johnny Otis' attendance as band leader on one of the sessions. And after his second Peacock single failed, Richard went to Macon and got to work washing dishes at a bus station diner. There, he met a fellow budding musician and oddball known as a skew reader, Junior or Escarita, depending on the situation. Escarita taught Richard his aggressively percussive piano approach, which possessed the muscular strength and drive that distinguished R&B from rock and roll. Escarita helped Richard focus the energy of his performance approach, and when Lloyd Price watched Little Richard play with his new band, The Upsetters, he suggested he contact Specialty Records, his label at the time. Specialty sent Richard to New Orleans to record with producer Robert Bumps Blackwell and engineer Cosimo Matassa. While his first session produced nothing of note, he played a raunchy song he'd written called Tutti Frutti during a break that reflected the hard rocking sound he learned from Escarita. Up the lyrics, which were originally about sex, Specialty released Tutti Frutti in October 1955, and it was an instant hit, reaching number 2 on the R&B singles charts and number 29 on the pop charts. Although many stations felt the record was too raucous for the airwaves, preferring to play a toned-down cover by Pat Boone.
When we went into the Dewdrop Inn, there was a piano, all of the boosters, rounders, pimps, whores, and everything else was hanging around. And that was when I began to know and understand Richard. Because that's all you got to do is give Richard an audience, turn the lights on, and the show is on.
And Richard jumped on the piano and did a wah ba loo ba ba la bam bam. So they heard it and said, "Wait a minute, what's that?" It was a hook that they had never heard before. But Richard had been singing that phrase for years, you know, on the Chitlin circuit.
And so I started singing. Wah ba blue ba blah bam boom. If it don't fit, don't force it. You can grease it and make it easy. If you want it, you got it. Tutti Frutti, good booty.
The lyrics could be interpreted as gay sex.
They're not gonna play that on the radio.
Tutti Frutti, good booty. And everybody knew this ain't about ice cream. But the primary reaction from the producer's point of view was that, hey, this sounds like a hit record.
I asked him, did he have a grudge against making money? He said, no. I said, good.
They said it was smutty, and so they helped me clean up my own lyrics. It was my song. I bought the song there.
Yeah, so we wrote the words Tutti Frutti all routine. And a girl named Sue and a girl named Daisy put Richard on the piano. And in 15 minutes, I think we cut 2 or 3 cuts. And it's been history ever since.
This song made Little Richard an overnight star, and between 1956 and 1957, he delivered a string of singles that were R&B and pop hits and cemented his reputation as the wildest man in rock and roll, including Long Tall Sally.
Just got paid. What about my money? Don't try to say. My heart said go, go. I have a time called Saturday night and I feel fine.
The Girl Can't Help It, Lucille, and Jenny. Richard would spend decades battling the penurious recording and publishing contracts he signed with Specialty, but his concert earnings made him wealthy and he won a key role in Frank Tashler's rock and roll comedy film The Girl Can't Help It. Richard was living a good life, relocating to a mansion in Los Angeles and purchasing a fleet of brightly colored Cadillacs, but that came to an end in October 1957 when he had the first of several apocalyptic visions while traveling to Australia, convincing him he needed to turn away from the sinful influences of rock and roll. Within a few months, he gave up secular music, enrolled in college to study theology, married, and conducted an evangelical crusade. Richard recorded Pray along with Little Richard Volume 1 and Volume 2 for N Records in 1960, while Mercury published The King of the Gospel Singers in 1962, produced by Quincy Jones. Richard was engaged for a tour of the United Kingdom in the fall of 1963, where his recordings continued to sell, with Sam Cooke serving as co-headliner. Richard was furious on the first night because they expected to hear him perform his rock roll classics and booed his church act. He was even more displeased when Cooke received a standing ovation. Richard quickly decided to give his fans what they wanted, and for the remainder of the tour, he performed a collection of his oldies that wowed the audience and stole the stage from Cooke. The response was so great that Richard promptly scheduled another British tour with the Beatles, who were on the verge of becoming worldwide sensations, to open the gigs. Richard signed with VJ Records and released a comeback album, 1964's. Little Richard is back, and there's a whole lot of shaking going on, which included the R&B hit I Don't Know What You've Got But It's Got Me, as well as Greatest Hits, which featured new recordings of his hits for Specialty. A brief collaboration with the Columbia-affiliated Oki label resulted in 1967's The Explosive Little Richard, produced by Don Covey and recorded when Jimi Hendrix was a member of Richard's road band. For the most part, these recordings did not generate many sales, but his frequent touring in North America, the United Kingdom, and Europe helped him enlarge his audience, and as first era rock and roll came back into vogue in the late 60s. Richard's triumph in appearances at rock and roll revival concerts alongside the likes of Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Fats Domino found him filling arenas and topping festival bills once again, as well as headlining showrooms in Las Vegas. Richard signed with Reprise Records after earning his place as one of rock and roll's most dynamic performers in 1970s. The Real Thing produced his first hit song in years, Freedom Blues. However, two follow-up albums, 1971's and King of Rock and Roll 1972's. The Second Coming failed to find an audience. Reprise chose not to release a fourth finished album, Southern Child, which was eventually released in 2005 on the box set King of Rock and Roll, the complete Reprise recordings. The 1974 album Right Now was recorded in a single night with Bumps Blackwell producing, and it garnered so little attention that most fans hardly noticed it. In 1976, he re-recorded his 1950 songs for K-Tel Records on an album titled Little Richard Live. Richard continued to travel regularly, but he had acquired a serious drinking problem, as well as a habit of consuming cocaine, heroin, and PCP. Weary of touring and pharmaceutical dependence, Little Richard left rock and roll in 1977 to pursue evangelism, abandoning secular music in favor of preaching. He recorded a gospel album for the Word label in 1979, God's Beautiful City, but then disappeared from the mainstream entertainment scene. After several years away from the public eye, Richard made a great media impact in 1985 with the release of The Life and Times of Little Richard, the Quasar of Rock, authored by Charles White in collaboration. The book was a wild yarn that lived up to all rumors about his on-stage flamboyance and backstage decadence, while also testifying to his latter-day religion, and it sold well and reintroduced him to the spotlight. Richard's appearances on talk shows to promote the book, to director Paul Mazursky casting him as a flamboyant record producer in a 1986 comedy, It Was Down and Out in Beverly Hills, launching a successful second career that saw the rocker appear in movies and television projects well into the 2000s. Richard collaborated with Billy Preston on a gospel-tinged rocker, Great Gosh Almighty, for the soundtrack too, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, and his popularity inspired him to record an album for Warner Bros. In 1986, Lifetime Friend. In 1991, Richard donated a version of Itsy Bitsy Spider to the album For Our Children, a benefit released by Disney aimed to generate cash for pediatric AIDS charities. Richard's tune received such attention that Disney hired him to record an entire album for youngsters 1992's Shake It All About, which went platinum and became one of his best-selling albums. Richard's following recordings were confined to sporadic guest appearances on multi-artist collaborations, but he continued to perform live. As he battled sciatic nerve discomfort and had hip replacement surgery, his shows became less frequent and intense. Richard announced his retirement in a 2013 interview with Rolling Stone, and despite occasional public appearances, he became reclusive and rarely spoke to the media. Though he did grant a brief interview in 2017 after Chuck Berry's death to honor the man he called one of my best friends in music. That same year, his debut album 1957's Here's Little Richard received a long-awaited release along with a bonus disc of demos and alternate takes. Little Richard passed on May 9, 2020 in Tullahoma, Tennessee at the age of 87 after battling bone cancer.
Next tonight, celebrating an American original, Little Richard, a founding father of rock and roll with an unforgettable flair. He has died. Here's ABC's David Wright.
Here's that real solid man of rock and roll, Little Richard.
Proof that Little Richard was one of the founding fathers of rock and roll is the fact that one of the acts that opened for him was the Beatles back in Hamburg, Germany. The Fab Four undiscovered. Little Richard already a big star.
Good golly, Miss Molly!
Hits like Good Golly Miss Molly and Lucille. Little Richard helped R&B cross over and create rock and roll. Pat Boone helped too.
I got a gal, her name's Sue. She knows just what to do.
Boone made Tutti Frutti the bigger hit, but the original
I got a gal named Sue. She knows just what to do.
that belonged to Richard Penniman, who wrote it washing dishes at the Greyhound bus station in Macon, Georgia.
He saw Mary coming and he ducked back in the alley.
Little Richard, quietly gay under that haircut in the Eisenhower era, an inspiration to Elton John, Freddie Mercury, and others. David Wright, ABC News, New York.
Lisa Courts, a filmmaker, released the documentary film Little Richard, I Am Everything in 2023, celebrating Richard's life and career as a black rock and roll legend and an early hero of LGBT culture. The Via Sarah Banda label released a soundtrack CD with 11 tunes from Richard's discography, as well as new recordings by Valerie June, Corey Henry, and Tamar Collie Brown. Now, before we go, I have a question for you all. What is your favorite song from Little Richard?